The city that never slept was drowning in its own lights. New York stretched endlessly beneath a velvet sky, glittering like 1,000 broken stars scattered along the Hudson River. Yellow taxis weaved between towers that pierced the clouds, and a cold spring wind carried the sound of distant horns and sirens across Manhattan's sleepless veins. But high above the chaos, silence reigned on the 88th floor of Peterson Tower. Inside the glass-walled office, Terry Peterson stood motionless before the panoramic window. The city pulsed with life below, but it had become nothing more than a living painting, vibrant, dazzling, yet hollow for him. The man the financial press once called the architect of the East Coast carried himself like stone, carved into human form, tall, broad-shouldered, and impeccably dressed. His silver cufflinks glimmered faintly beneath the dim golden light. To everyone else, he was the embodiment of power, a man who could sway markets with a single signature. But tonight the reflection in the glass was not the legendary billionaire. It was a man who had everything money could buy, and yet nothing that truly mattered. He leaned forward slightly, resting a hand against the cool glass. The weight of the city pressed against him like a tide. For years, his life had been a relentless cycle of numbers, meetings, contracts, victories, measured in headlines and dollar signs. He dined with senators, whispered to kings of finance, and could command an empire at will. And yet, beneath the layers of steel and success, his chest carried only silence. Terry Peterson owns the city, but not a smile, a journalist had once written. At the time, he'd laughed, dismissing the line as an easy hook for readers. Standing alone, he realized it had been the truest thing anyone ever said about him. A soft knock interrupted the silence. The door opened, and Maggie, his loyal assistant of 12 years, stepped in. Her calm, precise presence rarely carried hesitation, but her hand trembled slightly tonight as she placed a single ivory-white envelope on his desk. "This just came in from Parker and Associates," she said softly. Terry's brows knit together. The name carved into the paper hit him like a ghost rising from the ashes. Parker. It had been 6 years since he last heard it. 6 years since he'd buried it deep beneath contracts and skyscrapers, locking the memory away where light couldn't reach. "Who sent it?" His voice was low, almost detached. Maggie hesitated. Luna Parker's firm. The air shifted. Terry's fingers hovered above the envelope, without touching it, as though a single brush could set fire to the life he'd so carefully built. Luna. He didn't need to open it. Her name alone carved through him like a blade. After Maggie quietly left, silence reclaimed the office. Terry finally reached for the envelope, holding it in his palm, but instead of opening it, he pressed it to his chest, eyes closing. For a moment, the walls dissolved. The office melted away, and the past returned vivid, unforgiving. He remembered her laughter first. The sound of warm, unguarded joy filled their tiny Brooklyn apartment, where sunlight spilled across chipped hardwood floors. Back then, they had nothing, no power or luxury, just 2 cups of cheap coffee and stolen mornings before work. Luna Parker, the only woman who had ever managed to pull him out of his own shadow. She used to dream aloud while sitting cross-legged on the kitchen counter, books scattered around her knees. One day, Terry, "I'm going to be an attorney," she would say, her deep brown skin glowing in the afternoon light. "I'll defend people no one else listens to. You'll see." And he'd smile, pretending to listen, pretending not to count stock tickers in the back of his mind. Even when they were young, his eyes were already fixed on the empire he craved. He thought love could wait. He thought she would wait. But when his rise began, the contracts, the acquisitions, the billion-dollar deals, it swallowed him whole. Calls went unanswered, dinners forgotten, birthdays missed. One night, under a rain-soaked Manhattan sky, she walked out of his penthouse, carrying only a single suitcase. She never looked back, and he never chased her. Back then, he believed he couldn't be both the man she needed and the man who built empires. Terry opened his eyes, the memory fading into the dimness of his office. His chest felt heavy, his throat dry. He told himself he had made peace with her absence and the silence for 6 years. But if that were true, why did his hands tremble now? He placed the envelope on the desk, but didn't open it. He wasn't ready. Not yet. Tonight, his world belonged to another battlefield he knew too well. At 9:00 p.m., a sleek black car carried Terry toward the Crystal Hall, Manhattan's crown jewel of glass and light, where New York's elite gathered under chandeliers as bright as constellations. Inside, billionaires toasted billionaires, their voices blending with the soft hum of jazz and the crisp chime of champagne. Terry walked in, clad in a tailored charcoal suit, his presence commanding quiet respect wherever he passed. He shook hands, nodded at senators, acknowledged hedge fund titans. To the world, he was untouchable. But his thoughts were nowhere in that glittering room. They were on the envelope, on the name Parker, on the memory of a woman who once laughed into his chest at midnight and whispered promises he never kept. He forced his lips into a polite smile, replying to endless praise. Peterson Capital's latest acquisition genius, Terry. Wall Street hasn't seen a vision like yours in decades. You're rewriting the game, my friend. The words rolled past him like hollow wind, and then he froze. Luna Parker sat across the room at a small, intimate table near the far wall. The world stopped breathing. Her hair was shorter now, curling just beneath her jawline. Her face held the soft maturity of a woman who had survived storms, her honey-brown skin catching the light, her posture calm yet untouchable. She wore a midnight dress, simple enough to defy the glittering extravagance around her, yet somehow she commanded the room without trying. She was no longer the Luna he once knew. She was something more unyielding, self-possessed, distant. Terry's breath caught his pulse stumbling. For 6 years he had imagined this moment, yet nothing prepared him for the reality of it. Then he heard a ripple of laughter, soft and bright, coming from the table. He looked again and saw 3 children. 2 girls, 1 boy, their voices bubbling like sunlight breaking through clouds. And as one of the little girls tilted her head thoughtfully, Terry felt his stomach drop. His gesture, his habit mirrored perfectly in miniature. The boy turned then, meeting his gaze from across the hall. Eyes, icy blue. His eyes. Terry's body went rigid, his fingers curling into a fist. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. And yet the truth carved itself into his chest. The hum of polite applause and hushed conversations blurred into silence for the first time in years. He barely noticed when someone called his name, offering another compliment about his latest deal. He muttered something inaudible and began to move one step, then another, weaving through the tables toward her, toward them. And then she looked up, their eyes locked. Luna's smile faltered instantly, replaced by something else entirely, a quiet tension, like glass strained beneath too much weight. She reached instinctively for the hand of the boy beside her, drawing him close. Luna, Terry breathed, his voice rougher than he expected. Terry. Her reply was soft, but edged her tone, neither warm nor cruel, only steady, guarded. The most petite girl, with curls the color of dusk, tugged on Luna's sleeve, whispering, "Mommy, who's that man?" Luna's gaze never left Terry's. "Just someone your mother used to know." The words struck him like an unspoken verdict. They burned, but not as much as the sight of the 3 pairs of curious eyes staring up at him. Eyes that could very well be his. His throat tightened. He tried to speak, but only fragments came. They are... Luna cut him off with a calmness that sliced sharper than anger. They're mine. Terry stood there locked between past and present, drowning in a truth he couldn't yet touch. The world around him shifted, the crystal hall spinning into a blur of glass light and distant music. And for the first time in 6 years, he realized one thing. His past hadn't ended. It had just begun. If you felt your heart racing as Terry faced the ghosts of his past, share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think those children are his? Leave a like if you believe in second chances. Follow the channel so you won't miss part 2, where old wounds bleed and buried truths rise again. Because sometimes, the most dangerous storms are the ones we thought we'd already survived. The chandeliers of the crystal hall gleamed like trapped constellations, scattering soft fragments of light across crystal glasses and polished marble floors. A piano whispered a mellow tune somewhere in the background, each note weaving into the low hum of 100 conversations. But to Terry Peterson, the room had gone soundless. Across the glittering space, Luna Parker sat composed, elegant, untouchable. And beside her, 3 children laughed softly, their small voices threading through the music like something fragile and pure. Terry couldn't move at first. His chest tightened, his breath uneven, as if his lungs had forgotten how to work. 6 years of silence. 6 years of wondering where she was, what had become of her. 6 years of convincing himself that she was gone from his world for good. And now she was here, with them, with 3 children. A voice pierced through the fog. Mr. Peterson, the Tokyo merger. Congratulations. He turned briefly, forcing a practiced smile, nodding without hearing a word. His body moved instinctually, weaving between tables, his polished shoes silent against the marble floor. Each step felt heavier than the last. As he drew closer, Luna finally looked up. Her gaze met his, steady and unblinking, and for a moment, it was as if the entire world shifted on its axis. No words passed, but something electric and unspoken filled the space between them. Resentment, longing, grief, and the remnants of something they'd buried too deep. When he stopped at her table, the soft laughter of the children faded into silence. Luna, Terry said quietly, his voice deeper, rougher than he remembered it being. Terry. Her reply was cool, deliberate, not hostile, not warm. Neutral, but layered beneath it was something he couldn't read, or perhaps something she refused to let him read. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. One of the little girls with honey-brown curls and wide, curious eyes tugged at Luna's sleeve. Mommy, she whispered, glancing up at Terry. Who's that man? Luna's hand rested gently on the girl's back, her gaze never leaving his. Just someone. Your mother used to know. The words quiet, as they were sliced clean through him. Terry's eyes swept over the 3 small faces gathered around Luna's table. A boy, maybe 5, maybe 6, sat closest to her. His tiny hand tangled in the fabric of her dress. His soft, dark hair framed a pale face, but his eyes, those piercing blue eyes, the same glacial color Terry saw in his own reflection every morning. Beside him, a girl tilted her head thoughtfully, her posture so familiar it unsettled him. It was the same gesture he made when deep in thought, when the world narrowed to calculations only he could see. And the smallest one, curls bouncing around her cheeks, gripped a teddy bear tightly while peeking shyly from behind Luna's arm. His chest constricted. He knew. He knew. Luna, he whispered, struggling against the lump in his throat. Are they? They're mine. She cut in sharply, her voice as steady as glass beneath pressure. Her hand smoothed the boy's curls absent-mindedly, her gaze locked on Terry with unyielding control. It should have stopped him. It should have frozen him in place. But instead, it broke something open. For a long moment, the noise of the gala melted into a distant hum. He could no longer hear the champagne glasses clinking, nor the polite laughter around him. There was only Luna. Only her voice echoed in his ears. 6 years. 3 children. And not once had she called. Or had she, Mr. Peterson? The booming voice of Harold Green, one of his board members, crashed into the tension. Harold clapped a firm hand on his shoulder, grinning obliviously. The European investors are over the moon about tonight's numbers. You should join us at the main table. We've been waiting for you. Terry didn't look at him. His jaw tightened, his gaze fixed on Luna, as though tethered there by gravity itself. I need some air, he muttered, stepping away before Harold could argue. But he didn't leave the gala. He followed his instincts, which led him toward Luna's table. Luna looked up again when he returned, her expression unreadable this time. You shouldn't be here, she murmured, just for him. Her voice carried no warmth he once knew, only quiet restraint, like a dam holding back a flood. Luna, Terry said, his voice low and measured, but heavy, with something unspoken. We need to talk, she replied. There's nothing to talk about, her lips curving in the faintest ghost of a smile that never reached her eyes. The life you chose doesn't include me anymore. His breath left him in a quiet exhale, but he steadied himself. Are they mine? She hesitated. It was subtle, a flicker across her gaze, a slight tightening of her fingers around the boy's hand. But then she drew herself upright, spine straight, chin slightly lifted. They're mine, she repeated firmly, her voice unshaken this time. The finality in her tone was like a locked door, but it didn't stop the ache swelling in his chest. He wanted to demand answers and the truth he was certain of, but the sight of 3 small faces watching him made the words stick in his throat. Instead, he stepped back, retreating into silence as 1,000 unspoken questions clawed at his mind. The rest of the gala unfolded around him like a dream he wasn't part of. Champagne flutes sparkled, deals were whispered over velvet linens, and laughter danced beneath the music. But for Terry, the night blurred into fragments of glass and muted sound. He felt Luna's presence everywhere he went, like static in the air. Every so often, he caught himself glancing back at her table, the soft curve of her shoulders, the way she leaned close when one of the children whispered to her, the faint dimple that appeared when she smiled gently at them. Memories collided violently inside him, the way her laughter once filled the tiny apartment in Brooklyn, the way her fingers used to brush his wrist absent-mindedly when she cooked, the way they used to dream about a life they would build together. But she had built that life without him. Hours later, when the lights dimmed and the crowd began to thin, Terry finally left the Crystal Hall. Outside, the Manhattan night smelled rain on cold steel, the Hudson River glinting faintly beneath the city lights. He stepped into his waiting car, but didn't immediately give the driver an address. Instead, he sat in silence, his hand resting on the unopened envelope from Parker and Associates he had shoved into his pocket before leaving the office. He traced the embossed logo with his thumb, knowing what it meant, knowing it had always meant her. And yet, he couldn't bring himself to open it. Meanwhile, across the city, Luna guided her car quietly through Brooklyn's narrow streets. The children had fallen asleep in the back seat, their soft breaths filling the silence. But her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, knuckles pale beneath warm skin. She had seen it in his eyes, the recognition, the shock, the guilt. She had prepared herself for this night for years, rehearsed what she would say if she ever saw him again. And yet, standing beneath the blinding chandeliers of the Crystal Hall, When his gaze found hers, all the words she thought she had burned away came rushing back. Her heart betrayed her. It had skipped, and she hated herself for it. Back at her modest brownstone, Luna tucked the children into bed, brushing curls from Noah's forehead, smoothing Lily's blanket, kissing Ethan's temple. She lingered a moment longer than usual at the doorframe, watching them breathe in unison, small and safe, in a world she had built from nothing. Then she went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and sank into the nearest chair. For 6 years, she had carried everything alone. Every fever, every scraped knee, every terrifying midnight when hospital lights glared too bright. She'd been their anchor, their entire world, and she had sworn never to let him back into it. But tonight, when she saw Terry standing there, she realized the past was not done with her. Not yet. In his penthouse, high above the city, Terry finally gave in. He slit open the envelope, pulling out a single sheet of paper stamped with the gold crest of Parker & Associates. His eyes scanned the opening line, and his chest tightened, regarding the legal rights of the 3 children. The words blurred his pulse pounding in his ears. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a chance. Luna hadn't simply resurfaced. This was deliberate. She wanted him to know. Terry leaned back in his chair, staring at the city stretching like an endless ocean beneath his window. Lights glittered like distant fires, but for the first time in years, they brought him no sense of triumph. Because nothing he had built, no skyscraper, no merger, no empire mattered compared to the 3 small lives he had just discovered. And tonight, standing beneath chandeliers and glass, he realized something else. The past wasn't waiting quietly in the shadows. It was coming for him. The city outside Peterson Tower was waking beneath a veil of spring haze, the glass skyline reflecting faint hues of pale sunlight. But inside the 88th floor office, Terry Peterson sat in complete silence. The ivory letter from Parker & Associates lay open on his desk, its single line echoing endlessly in his mind, regarding the legal rights of the 3 children. 3 children. The words had settled into him like lead cold and unrelenting. His thoughts circled back to the night before the chandeliers of the Crystal Hall. The quiet weight of Luna's gaze, the way the little boy's piercing blue eyes mirrored his reflection. It couldn't be a coincidence. And yet, her words had been sharp, final. They're mine. But if that were true, why this letter? Maggie Terry called, his voice low, but edged, pulling the name across the office like an unspoken command. Within seconds, Maggie Hart, his longtime assistant, stepped inside her soft heels, whispering against the floor. She had worked beside him for over a decade, navigating his empires and storms with quiet precision. But as she met his eyes now, something in his expression unsettled her. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his hands beneath his chin. He said, "I need you to answer me honestly," his voice measured but taut. 6 years ago, did Luna Parker try to contact me? Maggie froze. For a brief, fleeting moment, her usually composed features faltered, and in that single hesitation, Terry had his answer. "Sir," she began, but stopped, her throat tightening. "Maggie," he said again, softer now, but no less steady. "Tell me." Her shoulders slumped. She lowered her gaze. "Yes." Deep and final, the word struck like the toll of a distant bell. She called. Terry's voice dropped an octave. She called. She wrote. Maggie often admitted, her fingers twisting together, an uncharacteristic tremor in her voice. "I wasn't your assistant then. Amanda Reynolds. She handled your personal correspondence at the time." Terry's chest constricted, his pulse hammering. What did Amanda do? Maggie swallowed hard, forcing herself to continue. She returned the letters, blocked her number. It was your instruction, sir. You told her not to accept calls from anyone connected to your past. Silence fell like a blow. He remembered those months all too well. The relentless climb, the deafening rush toward expansion, the cold intoxication of power. He had been drowning in acquisitions mergers and billion-dollar deals. He'd convinced himself that detachment was survival, that cutting ties would quiet the noise. He had closed the door himself, and she had been on the other side. Terry's gaze drifted to the skyline beyond the glass walls, blurred and shifting through the rising mist. In the distance, the Hudson River cut a silver scar between Manhattan's towers, and for the first time in years, he felt small beneath its endless horizon. Luna had reached for him, over and over, and he hadn't just missed it, he'd silenced her without knowing. Or maybe he'd chosen not to know. He ran a hand down his face, breath unsteady, before leaning forward again. "Where are the letters?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Maggie hesitated. "Amanda left years ago. There's no guarantee anything survived." "Find them," he said quietly, each word deliberate, sharp enough to cut through the air. "Every call log, every letter, every trace." She nodded, but there was pity in her eyes as she left the room. Pity she had never once allowed herself to feel for him. When the office door shut, silence filled the space again, heavy as a confession. Terry leaned back into his chair and closed his eyes. The past came rushing in like floodwater. Luna's laughter in their tiny Brooklyn apartment, the warmth of her voice, as she read cases aloud late into the night, the soft press of her fingertips against his wrist as she fell asleep on stacks of legal books. On the quiet evening, she told him about her dream of defending people. No one else would stand up for how she wanted to change lives, not just survive them. He had been there sitting across from her on that battered old sofa, nodding absently, but his mind had been elsewhere, always elsewhere, sketching blueprints of Peterson Capital's rise on the walls of his ambition. He thought there would be time. He thought love could wait. But cruel and silent time had passed without him noticing, and when he finally turned around, she was gone. And now, 6 years later, there were 3 children, and an entire life he had missed. It was nearly midnight when Maggie returned holding a worn cardboard box. She placed it carefully on his desk, her expression grave. "This was in the archives," she said quietly. "It's incomplete. Some of the letters were destroyed, but these survived." She left him alone with the box. Terry stared at it for a long moment before pulling off the lid. Inside were envelopes, some still sealed, some frayed and bent from being handled too many times. His hands shook as he unfolded the first letter. "Terry, I know you're busy, but you need to hear this. I'm pregnant." He stopped breathing. Another letter written weeks later. "I called your office again. No one answers. I don't know if you've changed your number or don't want to hear from me. But there's a life growing inside me, Terry. Our life." And another, "I begged them to let me through. I've sent this everywhere I could. If you don't want to be here, fine. But at least know there are 3 of them now." His hands went still. 3. He clutched the letter so tightly the edges tore. The box was full of ghosts. Words she had screamed into silence years. She had lived without him. Milestones he had never known. First breaths, words, first steps. Tears burned at the corners of his eyes, blurring the neat black ink into indistinct shadows. Terry Peterson, the man Wall Street called unshakable, bowed his head over the letters and let himself break in a way he hadn't in decades. Not for the empire, not for the mergers, not for the billions, but for 3 little souls who had grown up without his name, without his voice, without his presence, and for the woman who had carried them through every storm alone. When the trembling in his hands finally stilled, Terry leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening with quiet resolve. The city lights sprawled endlessly beyond his window, but tonight they meant nothing. There were no profits that could buy back 6 lost years. No contract could erase the weight of absence. But there was one thing left he could do. He reached for his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the one name he had never deleted, though he had pretended it wasn't there for years. Luna Parker. His thumb hovered over the screen. He hesitated not out of fear of rejection, but because he understood perhaps for the first time what it meant to approach her, not as the man he used to be, but as the man he had to become. Across Brooklyn, in the quiet of her modest brownstone, Luna Parker stood by the kitchen sink, a glass of water untouched in her hand. The night was still, except for the faint hum of traffic outside and the soft murmur of the wind through the trees. The children were asleep upstairs, their breaths synchronized in the hush of their small shared room. But Luna couldn't sleep. Her reflection in the window caught the faintest shimmer of city lights behind her, and she closed her eyes, trying to steady her heartbeat. She had seen how Terry looked at them. Ethan's blue eyes, Lily's tilted head, and Noah's dimpled smile. She had seen recognition spark behind his composure, breaking through his carefully built walls. And she knew sooner or later he would come for answers. She wasn't ready. Not for his questions. Not for the pain they carried. In the silence, she replayed last night's moment under the chandeliers. The abrupt hush when their eyes met, the unspoken storm surging beneath Terry's restraint. There was a time when that gaze had anchored her. It meant safety, warmth, the promise of dreams intertwined. But that was a lifetime ago. Now it meant chaos. Because if Terry re-entered their lives, nothing would stay untouched. Not hers. Not the children's. And yet somewhere deep beneath the walls, she had built brick by brick something fragile trembled at the thought of him standing at her door again. In his penthouse, Terry sat motionless in the darkness, the letterbox resting beside him. The city stretched endlessly beyond the glass walls, glittering and indifferent. His phone screen still glowed faintly in his hand, Luna's name waiting silently. He didn't press call, not yet. Instead, he set the phone down and whispered into the quiet, "I missed everything, but I won't miss what's left." Outside, the lights of Manhattan burned steady and cold, but in the shadows of the Peterson Tower, a new fire began to rise, quiet, unyielding, and inevitable. Because Terry Peterson had decided. He would face her. He would face the children. And he would face the man he used to be, even if it shattered everything. The morning sunlight spilled across Manhattan's skyline, pale and sharp, slicing between the glass towers, like ribbons of gold. From the 88th floor of Peterson Tower, the city looked endless, yet for Terry Peterson, it had never felt smaller, more suffocating. The unopened files from last night still lay on his desk, a silent weight anchoring his thoughts to a past he couldn't escape. 6 years, 3 children, a box of unanswered letters. Terry had spent the entire night tracing back the decisions that had led him here. Yet no matter how many times he rewound the story, it always came back to the same truth. He had lost them, and now he intended to fight for what little remained. By mid-morning, Terry stood before a modest red brick building tucked between towering structures in Tribeca. The wooden plaque above the glass door read, "Parker and Associates, Family Law." His reflection stared back at him from the glass immaculate charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, jawline set like steel, the polished exterior of a billionaire. But beneath it, his chest was a storm. The last time he stood before Luna Parker, the world had been theirs. Back then, her dreams of becoming a lawyer were whispered between kisses, carved in late-night promises over cheap takeout in Brooklyn. Now that dream had become real, and she had built it without him. He took a slow breath, bracing himself, then pushed the door open. The small reception area was quiet, with shelves stacked with case files and law books. Behind the desk, a young paralegal glanced up, startled, before immediately recognizing him. Mr. Peterson. Ms. Parker is in a meeting, but... Tell her I'll wait, he said softly, voice steady, but carrying a weight that silenced the room. He sat in a chair by the window, back straight, hands clasped, watching the sunlight shift across the hardwood floor. Every minute stretched like a slow drip of water. Finally, a door opened. And there she was. Luna Parker stepped into the hallway, framed by the soft light spilling from her office. Her navy blazer cut a sharp, confident silhouette, her curls pinned neatly, her expression unreadable. Terry. Luna. Her voice was steady, but her fingers tightened around the file. For a moment, neither moved. Then, with a faint head tilt, she gestured toward her office. Come in. The office was modest, warmly lit, with sun-dappled plants by the window, and a wooden desk polished by years of careful work. Everything about the space carried her grounded, practical, quietly elegant. Terry's gaze lingered on a framed photograph on her bookshelf. 3 smiling children standing under the cherry blossoms at Prospect Park. His throat tightened, but he tore his eyes away before she noticed. Luna set the file down and sat opposite him, leaning back slightly, arms folding in a gesture that wasn't defensive, measured, guarded. You shouldn't have come, she said softly. You knew I would, he replied, his voice low. Her lips curved faintly, but there was no warmth in the expression. I was hoping you wouldn't prove me right. Silence stretched between them, fragile and heavy. Terry broke it first, his fingers tightening around the edge of the chair. Luna, the children, are they mine? Her dark eyes locked on his, unwavering. She didn't answer immediately, and for a moment he thought she might deny it again. But instead she exhaled, slow and deliberate. They're mine, she said finally, her voice calm but threaded with quiet steel. I raised them. I fought for them. I carried every fever, every scraped knee, every night of crying alone. And you, she stopped, her jaw tightening. You weren't there. Terry's chest clenched at the quiet accusation. I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know. You didn't want to know. Her words landed like a soft blow, restrained but sharp. I called Terry. I wrote dozens of times. Your assistant sent everything back. Every letter I poured myself into gone unopened. I didn't read them, he admitted, his voice hoarse. But I have them now. Her gaze flickered at that, the faintest ripple across her calm exterior, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Having them now, she said softly, doesn't change the fact that you missed 6 years of their lives. Terry leaned forward, his voice rawer than he intended. I missed everything he said quietly. Their first words, their first steps, every birthday. You must have read every story to them. I missed it all, Luna. I can't undo that. But I can be here now. Let me be here now. For a moment the mask slipped from her expression. Her eyes softened. Not forgiving, not yielding, but touched by the trace of the man she once knew. Then she drew a slow breath, composing herself again. You don't get to decide that, she said firmly. Being their father isn't something you can walk into because you're ready now. Then please tell me what I need to do, he said, almost pleading, though his voice stayed low, steady. Tell me what it takes. She studied him for a long moment, searching his face as if weighing his sincerity against the wounds she still carried. Finally, she reached into the file beside her and slid a set of papers across the desk. These, Luna said softly, are my terms." Terry's jaw tensed as he picked up the document, scanning the lines. 1. He could see the children, but only under her supervision. 2. He was forbidden from making decisions about their education, lifestyle, or future. 3. He must keep the press and Peterson Capital's world far away from them. No interviews, photographs, or corporate spotlight. 4. Financial support was allowed, but not required. At the bottom, in sharp, deliberate handwriting, was the line that mattered most. If you choose to be in their lives, you do not get to disappear again. Terry looked up from the papers, meeting her steady gaze. "You don't trust me." "No," Luna said quietly, but without hesitation. "I don't. And I won't. Not yet." Terry set the papers down slowly, his fingertips lingering on their edge. "Luna," he said, voice low. "I've built empires. I've won battles that should have broken me, but none of it matters if I can't stand in the same room as them and hear them laugh." Something unspoken moved in her eyes at that, but her posture stayed controlled, deliberate. "You don't understand," she replied. "They have a life, a rhythm, a world where I've made sure they feel safe. If you come into that world even once and leave again—" Her voice faltered slightly, almost imperceptibly. "It will destroy them." He exhaled the fight, draining from his shoulders. His hand rested flat on the papers, steady now. "Then I won't leave." For a long moment, neither of them moved, neither spoke. The sunlight shifted across the room, warming the edges of the hardwood floor, catching faintly in the soft curls framing Luna's face. There was still distance in her gaze, but beneath it, something fragile had stirred the faintest tremor of recognition, of the past neither of them could erase. "Sign it," she said finally, voice steady. "And we'll try." Terry picked up the pen. His hand trembled once, then stilled, and he scrawled his name across the bottom of the page. When he set the pen down, the silence between them was different, not lighter, not resolved, but irrevocably changed. Luna closed the file and stood smoothing her blazer. "I'll let you know when it's time," she said. He nodded, rising from the chair. At the door he paused, turning back once, his voice almost a whisper. "Thank you." She didn't respond. Outside, the streets of Tribeca glimmered beneath the soft afternoon sun, the city roaring around him, as if nothing had shifted. But inside Terry, everything had. He walked past the rows of red brick buildings, his gaze caught between reflections in glass storefronts and fragments of memory. Luna's voice, the weight of her conditions, the small hands he hadn't held yet. The empire he'd spent his life building suddenly felt small compared to the world he was trying to enter. And for the first time in 6 years, Terry Peterson felt something he thought he'd forgotten: hope. It wasn't a victory. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even trust. But it was a beginning, and beginnings he thought were worth everything. The rain had stopped just before dusk, leaving Brooklyn Heights awash in soft reflections. Street lamps glimmered against wet pavement, their golden halos blurring in shallow puddles. Terry Peterson stood at the foot of the brownstone steps, his chest-tight palms slightly damp, despite the crisp spring air. The townhouse was modest compared to the glass towers he called home, but as his gaze traveled up its weathered brick and ivy-touched edges, he felt he was standing before a fortress. He had faced boardrooms brimming with power, dismantled empires worth billions, and bent governments to his strategy. Yet this door, this quiet home, unnerved him more than any hostile takeover ever had. Because behind it were 3 small strangers who shared his blood, and a woman whose absence had hollowed 6 years of his life. Terry raised his hand to knock, but hesitated. Through the frosted glass he could see faint shadows flicker past, the kind of life lived in patterns, he had never been part of. Before he could gather the courage to move, the door opened. Luna Parker stood there, framed in the warm glow spilling from the hallway. Her navy sweater hung loose over dark jeans, curls falling freely around her shoulders, now softer than he'd seen them at the office. For a moment, neither spoke. Her gaze swept over him, the tension in his jaw, the hesitation in his stance, and something unreadable flickered in her eyes. "You're early," she said finally, her voice quiet but steady. "I didn't want to be late," he replied, equally soft. She stepped aside, gesturing him in. "The kids are upstairs getting ready." The words landed like a quiet weight. Stepping inside, Terry felt disoriented. The townhouse smelled faintly of lavender and something sweet, maybe vanilla, layered with traces of crayon wax and wooden floors worn smooth by restless feet. The living room opened into soft, lived-in warmth shelves, stacked with children's books, framed photos, catching afternoon light, a single threadbare armchair by the window, where Luna must have spent long nights reading legal briefs. He noticed a canvas tucked against the far wall, a messy explosion of paint strokes in bold colors signed Lily in crooked letters. This chaos felt alive, untouched, and unpolished for a man used to curated penthouses and silent spaces designed for perfection, a home built from effort, not wealth. And suddenly, he hated how much he had missed. "Terry." The voice was small, uncertain. He turned sharply to see a boy at the bottom of the staircase, clutching a toy car in one hand. His hair was a soft chestnut brown, his skin warm-toned like Luna's, but his eyes impossibly blue, mirrored Terry's exactly. The boy blinked at him wide-eyed, then glanced toward the hallway where Luna stood, her expression unreadable. "Ethan," she said gently. "This is Terry." The boy frowned, hesitant, as though tasting the name before daring to speak. "Hi." Terry cleared his throat, his voice careful. "Hi, Ethan." The silence between them was sharp enough to fracture, but two more miniature figures appeared behind Ethan before it could settle. A little girl with braids. Lily peeked around his shoulder, clutching a stuffed rabbit nearly as big as her. Beside her, a more petite boy. Noah toddled forward on uncertain legs, his tiny socks slipping slightly on the polished floor. Terry's throat tightened. 3 of them. Right there. Alive, laughing, breathing. His children. It was Ethan who broke the fragile stillness first. "Are you staying for dinner?" the boy asked, his tone edged with suspicion rather than curiosity. Luna stiffened, but said nothing. Terry crouched, slightly lowering himself to the boy's height, careful not to overstep. "Only if you want me to," he said softly. Ethan studied him, brows furrowed in quiet calculation, far too mature for his 7 years. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked back toward the living room, settling cross-legged on the rug, with his toy cars lined in a neat, deliberate row. Lily followed silently, half hidden behind her stuffed rabbit, and Noah trailed after her, his tiny hands clapping once, before he plopped down beside his siblings. Terry stood momentarily, fighting the urge to fill the silence before Luna's voice reached him gently from behind. "They're cautious with strangers." He glanced at her, the weight of her words not lost on him. He was a stranger. To them. To their world. And that realization gutted him. Dinner was quiet at first, filled mainly with the sounds of forks against plates, and Noah's soft giggles as he dropped his spoon for the 3rd time. Luna moved around the kitchen with the efficiency of someone used to balancing chaos and exhaustion, sliding plates across the table without fuss. Seated at one end, Terry felt painfully aware of the space between them, not just the physical distance, but the years of absence compressed into every unsaid word. Finally, Lily broke the silence. "Do you like pancakes?" she asked suddenly, her big brown eyes curious, a small streak of syrup on her cheek. Terry smiled faintly, grateful for the question. I do. Especially with blueberries. What about you? Her face lit up as she nodded enthusiastically. Me too, Mommy makes the best ones. Lily's soft warmth cracked the tension slightly, but Ethan remained silent, pushing peas around his plate without meeting Terry's gaze. Luna noticed, but said nothing. After dinner, the children disappeared upstairs, their laughter trailing faintly down the hallway. Terry stood by the window, his hand resting on the curtain's edge, watching the streetlights burn through the growing darkness. You handled that well, Luna said softly behind him. He turned, brows raised slightly. Did I? She said you didn't force it. Arms folded loosely across her chest. They need time. Ethan, especially. Terry nodded slowly, understanding what she didn't say. Ethan was the oldest. He had carried the most, remembered the most, and understood the absence more sharply than the others. A part of Terry ached at the thought. Not guilt alone, but longing for what he could never reclaim. Luna leaned against the doorway, overseeing him. This isn't easy for them. It won't be easy for you either. He met her gaze steadily. I don't want easy. I want honesty. Something flickered across her face, a flash of something she quickly buried, and she looked away, focusing on tidying up a nearby stack of mail. Terry spotted a framed photo half hidden behind a stack of files on the bookshelf beside the sofa. He reached for it instinctively, pausing when Luna didn't stop him. The picture shows Luna holding Noah as a baby, Ethan clinging to her leg, and Lily perched awkwardly on her hip. Her smile was soft but tired, her hair pulled back hastily, shadows beneath her eyes speaking of sleepless nights. She had carried all of this alone. Every fever, every midnight terror, every scraped knee and first day of school. And he hadn't been there for any of it. The photo trembled slightly in his hand before he set it carefully back in its place, his chest hollow with a kind of grief that had no outlet. Luna's voice reached him quietly. You can't change what's gone, Terry. He turned to her, his voice rough but steady. No, but I can choose what comes next. Later, as Terry prepared to leave, small footsteps padded down the stairs. Ethan stood at the bottom, his toy car still clutched tightly, his expression unreadable. You left before the boy said, his voice low, but cutting in its honesty. Terry knelt, meeting his gaze directly. I didn't know you were here, he said softly. But now that I do, I won't leave again. Not if you'll let me stay. Ethan studied him for a long moment, the weight of unspoken trust balanced precariously between them. Then, without a word, the boy turned and headed back upstairs. It wasn't acceptance, but it wasn't rejection either. It was a beginning. When Terry finally stepped outside, the evening air was cool against his skin, carrying the faint hum of the city beyond the quiet street. He paused at the bottom of the steps, glancing back at the warm glow from Luna's windows. Inside, the life he had missed moved on three small figures. Upstairs, a woman rebuilding worlds he had once promised to help her build. For the first time in years, Terry didn't feel invincible. He felt human. And maybe that was what this would require. Not grand gestures, not power, not wealth, just showing up, every day, without fail. The rain had begun again, soft and quiet, brushing against his shoulders as he walked back toward the waiting car. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about empires or negotiations. He was thinking about Ethan's guarded eyes, Lily's syrup-streaked cheeks, Noah's clumsy laugh, and the woman who had carried them through everything he hadn't. And beneath the steady drizzle, Terry Peterson made himself a silent promise. This time he would stay. The night had settled over Manhattan like velvet, the city's restless glow spreading across the skyline, touching steel and glass alike. From the 90th floor of Peterson Tower, the world below looked smaller, almost quiet, but the silence was deceptive inside Terry Peterson's office. The storm had begun. An email sat open on his laptop, its subject line like a live wire. Confidential media leak. Parker and children. Terry read it once, twice again, as if repetition might undo the reality etched across the screen. Someone had leaked photographs not of him or Peterson Capital, but of Luna. Luna is walking the kids to school. Luna is carrying groceries up the brownstone steps. Luna laughing softly beneath the shade of cherry blossoms at Brooklyn Bridge Park, Noah's tiny hand in hers. And beneath the photos in cold clinical print, the headline screamed, "Peterson, heir scandal, billionaire's secret family exposed." By the next morning, his boardroom burned with tension. 12 faces surrounded the obsidian conference table, each expression a cocktail of fury, fear, and calculation. This merger with Vanguard Pharmaceuticals is worth $4.8 billion. Terry snapped. Alexander Crowe, his CFO. Investors will read it as instability if the public thinks you've hidden a family. The vote will tank. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. "You should issue a statement," said Elise Grant, his legal counsel sharp and composed. "Control the narrative before the tabloids do." Terry leaned back, hands clasped tightly, jaw locked. His temples throbbed with the weight of a single thought looping endlessly: Luna. He had promised her privacy and promised the children safety. And now, his voice was calm when he finally spoke, but steel was beneath it. No one touches Luna. No cameras. No statements. Nothing. Alexander slammed a file onto the table, his frustration breaking through. "Terry, you cannot protect her and this company simultaneously. You need to decide which matters more." Terry's gaze sliced toward him, ice cold and absolute. "I already have." When Terry arrived at the brownstone that evening, the rain had started again, soft, relentless, as though the city was holding its breath. Luna opened the door before he knocked, her expression taut with unspoken rage. "You knew," she said flatly. "I didn't," he replied, stepping inside, carefully shutting the door behind him. "I found out this morning." Her arms crossed tightly, as if holding herself together. "Please don't lie to me, Terry. Don't tell me you had nothing to do with this." "I didn't," he repeated softer this time, steadying his voice. "But I swear to you, I'll find out who did." She turned away, pacing the small living room, her breath sharp and uneven. "What does this mean?" "They're outside, Terry. Reporters, cameras, asking them questions they don't understand." At the sound of her voice cracking, his chest tightened painfully. "I know," he said, quietly, "and I'm sorry." "Sorry? Doesn't change the fact that my children, our children, woke up to strangers taking pictures through their window." She whispered, her voice raw, now trembling against the weight of exhaustion she'd carried for years. He wanted to reach for her, but stopped, his fingers curling at his side instead. Upstairs, faint voices drifted down the hallway. Ethan's was the sharpest. "Why are there people outside?" Mommy Luna's shoulders stiffened at the sound, and she closed her eyes briefly before heading up the stairs, Terry following at a distance. In the shared bedroom, Ethan sat cross-legged on his bed, clutching his toy car tightly, his blue eyes wide and wary. Lily sat beside him, nervously, braiding and unbraiding her rabbit's ears, while Noah gnawed absently on his blanket. Luna knelt in front of them, her tone soft but deliberate. "Some people found out about Daddy." She began, choosing her words carefully. "They want to take pictures and write stories, but that doesn't change anything about us. We're safe. We're here. That's what matters. Ethan's gaze flicked to Terry, sharp and questioning. Is it your fault? The room went silent. Terry crouched his knees, almost touching the rug, meeting his son's gaze directly for the first time since that night they met. No, he said, his voice steady but quiet. But I should have protected you anyway. And I didn't. That's on me. For a long moment, Ethan studied him, measuring, testing, deciding. Then he nodded once curtly before curling back against his pillow. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't rejection either. Later that night, when the children had fallen into uneasy sleep, Luna stood by the kitchen window, her arms folded tight, her silhouette framed against the street lamp glow. You can't stop this, she said without turning around. When those photos hit the tabloids, the story isn't ours anymore. Terry leaned against the counter, his voice low. Then I'll buy the damn tabloids. She spun to face him, eyes blazing, but beneath her anger was something more profound: fear. That's not the point, she snapped. You can't fix this with money, Terry. You can't throw Peterson Capital at every problem until it disappears. His jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. Not because she was wrong, but because she was right. Her voice softened, but the tremor remained. I built this life so they'd be safe away from all that. She gestured vaguely toward the city beyond the glass, the towers, the wealth, the chaos tethered to his name. And now they're targets because of who you are. He took a step closer, his voice quieter now. They're targets because of who we are. And that means protecting them is my job too, whether you trust me or not. Luna stared at him for a long moment, her breathing uneven before finally looking away. By morning, the storm had worsened. Not the rain, but the noise. Articles spread like wildfire. Speculation filled morning talk shows, headlines shifting from whispered scandal to outright condemnation. Terry Peterson billionaire's secret love affair. Who is Luna Parker? Inside the hidden family that could topple a fortune. But this wasn't random chaos. Elise, his counsel, called him mid-morning with a sharp edge to her voice. This isn't just gossip, she said. Someone is feeding them information. The leak isn't from the outside, but from inside Peterson Capital. The pieces clicked into place with brutal clarity. The timing, the photos, the boardroom tension. This wasn't a scandal by chance. It was a strategy. Someone wanted to ruin him and would use Luna and the kids to do it. That evening, Terry sat in his office. The skyline sprawled beneath him and drafted a single email, not to the board, Elise, or the press. To Luna. I know this isn't what you asked for. I know you didn't want any of this, but someone did this on purpose, and I intend to find out who. Until I do, I've hired security for the house, discreet, invisible, but constant. They'll watch from across the street. If you want me to remove them, say the word. But I won't leave you unprotected. He hesitated before pressing send, knowing she might read it as control when all he wanted was safety. But some risks were worth taking. Within minutes her reply came, I hate this. I hate all of this. But don't move them. Terry parked a block away from the brownstone 3 nights later and waited. He didn't want to intrude, but couldn't stay away either. He could see soft movement through the window silhouettes framed by lamplight. Lily spinning clumsily in pajamas, Noah clapping at something he didn't understand. Luna leaning over Ethan's homework with quiet patience. The image pierced him like glass. This was what he'd lost. He'd fight for this now, no matter what it cost him. Peterson Capital was balanced on a knife's edge, a billion-dollar merger on one side, the family he'd never known on the other. The board wanted a clean break, silence, denial, distance. But Terry had made his choice before they ever asked. For the first time in his life, it wasn't the empire that came first. It was them. The storm wasn't over. The photographs were only the beginning. And somewhere deep in Peterson Capital, someone was still pulling strings. But this time, they weren't just attacking a billionaire. They were coming for a father. And that was a fight Terry Peterson didn't know how to lose. The sun barely touched the Manhattan skyline when Terry Peterson's phone lit up with a name that had haunted him for weeks: Elise Grant. He answered before the second ring. "We found the leak," she said, her voice clipped and cold. For a moment, Terry stopped breathing. "Who?" There was a pause, one deliberate enough to make his chest tighten. "It's Michael Sterling," Elise said finally. Michael Sterling, his right hand, his oldest friend from Harvard, the man who had helped build Peterson Capital from a cramped two-room office into an empire sprawled across continents, and now the man who had sold him out. By the time Terry walked into the executive conference room, the weight of betrayal had sharpened his composure to steel. Michael was already seated, his perfectly tailored suit immaculate as ever, though the faint twitch in his jaw betrayed his nerves. "You leaked photographs of my children," Terry said without preamble, his voice low, steady, dangerous. Michael didn't flinch, but his gaze dropped for a fraction of a second. He replied smoothly, "I didn't leak anything, though." The lie sat brittle in the air. "Don't," Terry cut in sharply, his knuckles white against the table's edge. Elise traced the files, the metadata, the encrypted emails. "It's you." Silence hung between them like a blade. Finally, Michael leaned back, exhaling softly, as though conceding to inevitability. "You're distracted," he said coolly. "This company is weeks away from a $4.8 billion merger, and you've got the media feasting on your personal life. The board's confidence is unraveling. I did what needed to be done." "You put Luna and my kids in danger," Terry said, voice like shattered glass. Michael's expression didn't shift. "And you put this company in danger. You're letting one woman and 3 children you barely know jeopardize everything we built." Terry's chair scraped against the floor as he stood. The restraint in his voice was terrifying. "Get out of my company, Michael. You're done." Michael's lips curved into something sharp and cruel. "Removing me fixes this. The board's already questioning your judgment. And Luna Parker. She's not just in the spotlight, Terry. She is in the spotlight now. Every rival you've ever crushed smells blood in the water." Terry's jaw tightened. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The guards escorted Michael out of Peterson Tower within the hour. But the damage had already been done. By evening, Terry was back at the brownstone. The street outside was quieter now, though a few reporters still lingered near parked cars, cameras hidden but ready. Inside, Luna sat at the kitchen table, a stack of untouched legal documents spread before her. Her curls were tied back messily, shadows deep beneath her eyes. "Michael Sterling," she said, without looking up as though she'd been expecting him to confirm it. "Yes." Her laugh was bitter, humorless. "You built empires with men like that. And you wonder why I didn't tell you about the kids?" He froze, her words striking with precise cruelty, not undeserved, but cutting all the same. Luna shoved a document across the table toward him. "Ethan came home today with a bruise on his arm. A kid at school shoved him, called him a secret billionaire brat. He's 7, Terry. 7. And this is his life now, because of you." He inhaled slowly, steadying himself. "Because of Michael," he corrected gently. She snapped her gaze up, fire burning behind her eyes. "Because of you," she repeated. "Because you walked back into our lives without thinking about what it would cost them." Since he learned of their existence, he wanted to argue and tell her he had thought of nothing but them. But the truth sat heavily in his chest. Luna wasn't entirely wrong. That night, as Terry lingered in the hallway, he overheard soft murmurs from the kids' room. Lily was curled against her rabbit Noah, fast asleep beside her. But Ethan sat upright on his bed, arms folded, staring at the wall. Terry knocked gently. "Can I come in?" Ethan didn't answer, but he didn't say no either. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Terry kept his voice low, careful, as though approaching a wild thing that might bolt. "I heard what happened at school today." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You don't get to say that. You don't get to act like you care when you weren't here before." The words landed like a slap. Terry inhaled slowly, grounding himself. "You're right," he admitted softly. "I wasn't here, and I can't change that. But I'm here now, and I'm not leaving." Ethan finally turned his blue eyes, Terry's own burning with unshed tears. "They know my name now," he said bitterly. "They know yours. They call me Peterson. I don't even know what that means, but I hate it." Terry swallowed hard. It means you're mine. But it doesn't mean you stop being you, Ethan." Ethan stared at him for a long moment, caught between anger and longing, between the urge to push away and the hope of being pulled closer. When Terry reached for him, tentative, slow, Ethan didn't lean in, but he didn't pull away either. 2 days later, Elise called again, her tone sharper this time. "It's worse than we thought," she said. "Michael's already feeding information to Vanguard's board. He's framing you as unstable, arguing that you're an emotional liability to the merger. He wants them to force you out." Terry rubbed a hand over his face, his patience thinning. "Let them try." "No," Elise snapped, surprising him. "This isn't about business anymore. They're using Luna and the kids as leverage, Terry. We intercepted messages someone hired private investigators. If they find something, they'll spin it to make you radioactive." The silence on his end stretched. The danger wasn't just corporate anymore. It was personal. That night, Luna stood in the living room, arms wrapped tightly around herself as she watched Terry pace. "He said we need to move you and the kids out of Brooklyn," stopping short in front of her. "There's a property in Tribeca. Private, gated, secure." Her eyes widened, sharp with disbelief. "So that's it. You uproot our lives, hide us behind another set of walls, and pretend the world isn't coming for us," he said. "I'm trying to keep you safe, quiet, but edged with frustration." She shook her head, curls tumoring loose. "No. You're trying to control everything the way you maintain your boardrooms. But this isn't a merger, Terry. This is my life. Their lives." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "It's our lives now." For a moment, neither spoke, the silence heavy between them. Finally, Luna exhaled slowly, turning away to face the darkened window. "I don't trust you," she admitted softly, her voice trembling just enough to crack something inside him. "Not yet." His chest tightened, but he nodded once quietly. "Then I'll earn it." 3 nights later, Brooklyn was quieter than it had been in weeks. The reporters were gone. The cameras had moved on to fresher scandals. But Terry knew better than to trust silence. From his car parked a block away, he watched the brownstone windows glowing faintly against the night. Inside, Luna was reading to Lily, her voice a soft lullaby spilling into the shadows. Noah stirred in his crib, and Ethan rolled restlessly in bed. Terry leaned back against the seat, exhaustion pressing against him. He had spent his life believing power meant control, that money could shield him from chaos. But now, standing at the edge of Luna's fragile world, he finally understood. Some battles couldn't be bought. Some wars had to be fought. And this one, protecting them, was the only war he intended to win. At 2 a.m., his phone buzzed. Elise again. Her voice was low, urgent. "Terry, you need to come to the office. Now. We just intercepted something." What, they're going after Luna directly? His hand clenched around the steering wheel, knuckles white against the leather. He didn't ask who they were. He already knew. The game had changed. The attacks were no longer whispers in tabloids or photos through hidden lenses. This was war. And this time they weren't after his empire. They were after his heart. The streets of Tribeca shimmered under a damp sheen of late-night rain, the soft glow of city lights bending against water-slick pavement. Inside the newly secured penthouse, the air was unnervingly still. No reporters, no cameras, no whisper of scandal intruding through open windows. But Luna Parker had stopped trusting quiet. She stood barefoot by the glass wall Manhattan's skyline, sprawling endlessly beneath her. From here, the city looked peaceful, almost fragile, a lie she desperately wanted to believe. Behind her, Terry Peterson sat at the edge of the sofa, his tie loosened, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. Weeks of tension had hollowed something in him, carving his sharp features into harder edges. His silence carried its weight heavier than any words he might have chosen. "Say it," Luna murmured without turning. He glanced up, frowning slightly. "Say what?" She said softly, "That this is temporary, saying that we're not hiding here forever." Terry's gaze held hers in the reflection of the glass. "We're not hiding," he said evenly. "We're repositioning." Luna laughed, brittle, bitter, exhausted. "You make it sound like another business deal." For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, a siren wailed faintly in the distance, swallowed quickly by the hum of the city. The next morning shattered whatever illusion of safety the penthouse offered. It started with a single ping, Elisa's message flashing on Terry's phone. "Turn on Channel 5. Now." He did. The screen blazed with breaking news. Exclusive first look inside the secret life of billionaire Terry Peterson. And then, Luna's face. Footage from the brownstone. Clips of her walking hand in hand with Ethan Lilly trailing behind. Photos of her leaving the grocery store. A grainy shot of Noah peeking curiously through the curtains. The voiceover was worse than the images. Who is Luna Parker? The Brooklyn single mother who may hold the keys to one of New York's most powerful fortunes. Anonymous sources claim Peterson may have been paying her off for years to hide the existence of his illegitimate children. Luna froze, every muscle locked in shock. "Paying me off," she whispered, as if the words burned her tongue. Luna Terry started, his voice low and careful, but she raised a hand, silencing him without looking away from the television. Her pulse roared in her ears as the anchor's voice twisted the truth into something unrecognizable. She wasn't a mother anymore. She was a headline, a weapon. Suddenly, the camera switched. Live footage. Outside Ethan's school. Dozens of reporters are swarming the gates and shouting his name. Flashbulbs exploding. Children crying. Luna's knees buckled before she caught herself on the sofa's edge. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Ethan." By the time they reached the school, chaos had consumed the block. Paparazzi lined the sidewalks, their shouts sharp and hungry, cameras held high above a sea of bodies. Luna pushed forward, weaving through the crowd, ignoring the questions thrown like daggers. "Luna, are you his mistress? Did Terry Peterson buy you a house? Are the children his heirs?" Security guards tried to hold the press back, but they surged like waves. It was Terry's presence that finally split the chaos. He moved through the swarm with a kind of controlled violence, his voice low but lethal when he ordered them to stand down. Inside the school gates, Ethan sat against the wall of the front office, his small frame, rigid fists clenched tightly around his backpack straps. Lily huddled close to him, wide-eyed and silent, while Noah rested in a teacher's arms, confused but calm. Luna dropped to her knees, pulling Ethan into her arms. He resisted at first, jaw locked, his body trembling. "They called me a liar," he muttered, his voice small but sharp. "They said you lied. About us. About him." She smoothed his hair back gently, her throat tight. "I know, baby. I know. They're wrong." When Ethan's gaze finally lifted, it landed on Terry, sharp, wounded, angry. "You did this," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You ruined everything." Terry froze as though struck. Before he could answer, Ethan wrenched free from Luna's arms and stormed past them, disappearing into the hallway. That night the penthouse was silent, except for the faint hum of the city below. Luna sat cross-legged on the bed, Ethan's backpack beside her, sorting through the crumpled worksheets he'd thrown into it. Terry leaned against the doorframe, sleeves rolled, shoulders tense. "He doesn't want to see me," he said quietly. "You expected anything else?" Luna's voice was calm, but exhaustion cracked the edges. Terry admitted that I didn't want any of this, for him, running a hand through his hair, for any of them. "But you brought it to us," she said. Not accusing, just stating the truth. Terry stepped closer, stopping at the edge of the bed. "I'll fix this, Luna." Her eyes lifted to meet his. "How?" "By throwing more money at it. By buying silence until the next secret drops. You can't negotiate your way out of this one." He sank into the armchair across from her, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. Terry Peterson looked suddenly devastatingly human for a man who had built empires. Elise stormed into the penthouse 3 days later, her usually pristine composure cracked at the edges. She said they've crossed the line without preamble, tossing a folder onto the coffee table. Inside were printed emails, each stamped with Vanguard's encrypted servers. They've hired investigators. They've dug up every debt, every hospital bill, every piece of Luna's past they can twist into a weapon. If they leak these— Elise paused, meeting Terry's gaze. "They'll make her look like she trapped you for money." Luna stiffened, the color draining from her face. "They can't do that," she whispered. "They can," Elise corrected softly. "And they will." Terry's jaw tightened, his silence sharp enough to cut. Then slowly, deliberately, he spoke. "Call a meeting. Tonight. Every board member. Every attorney. We end this." That night, the conference room at Peterson Tower was a battlefield. The city glittered beyond its floor-to-ceiling windows, indifferent to the war brewing inside. Half the board sided with Terry. The other half, emboldened by Michael Sterling's betrayal and Vanguard's whispers, demanded he neutralize the distraction. Neutralize Luna. Neutralize the kids. Cut them out entirely. Terry stood at the head of the table, his hands braced against the polished surface, his voice low and lethal. "You touch them," he said, his words sharp enough to silence the room. "And I walk. And when I walk, this company walks with me." A ripple of unease spread across the table. Some glared. Others shifted uncomfortably. But no one argued. Terry had drawn his line. Back at the penthouse, the night took a darker turn. Luna woke to silence where there should have been sound. No soft rustling of sheets. No faint murmur of cartoons playing on the tablet. Ethan's bed was empty. Panic rose, instantly sharp and choking. She tore through the rooms, calling his name, until Terry burst from his study phone, already in hand, barking orders into it. Security cameras caught him on Greenwich Street, walking fast, hood pulled tight over his head, his slight figure disappearing into the restless shadows of Manhattan. Luna's lungs burned as she ran into the street, heart hammering, Terry close behind her. The rain had started again. The city washed in silver and neon, the storm outside matching the one unraveling inside their fragile world. They found him 2 blocks away, perched on the curb beneath the Franklin Street station sign, knees pulled tight to his chest. Luna knelt first, her breath ragged, her palms trembling as she cupped his damp cheeks. "Ethan," she whispered, relief cracking through her voice. "You scared me half to death." He didn't look at her, his gaze fixed on Terry instead, blue eyes blazing through tears. "I didn't ask for this," he choked out. "I didn't ask to be a Peterson. I just wanted to be me." Terry crouched beside him, the city noise fading into nothing around them. "You are you," he said quietly, his voice breaking in places he couldn't hide. "And I will spend the rest of my life proving that being mine doesn't change that." For a moment, Ethan hesitated. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, he leaned into Terry's shoulder. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning. After Ethan finally fell asleep in the penthouse, Terry stood by the window, Manhattan sprawling endlessly beneath him. Elise's earlier words echoed in his head, cold and relentless. "They're going after Luna directly." He knew what that meant. Vanguard wasn't finished. Michael Sterling wasn't finished. The attack wasn't about scandal anymore. It was about destruction. And this time, Terry Peterson wasn't just protecting his empire. He was protecting his heart, his family, his future. And he was prepared to burn everything down to do it. The storm over Manhattan hadn't slowed for days, thunder rolling over the skyline, as if echoing the chaos unraveling beneath it. In the Tribeca penthouse, the atmosphere was equally heavy, the kind of stillness that presses against your lungs and makes breathing a conscious effort. Luna Parker sat curled on the leather sofa, arms wrapped around her knees, watching raindrops snake down the glass wall. Every few seconds she blinked hard, forcing herself to focus on the city lights instead of the gnawing dread in her chest. Behind her, Terry Peterson stood near the kitchen counter, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. He hadn't said much since Elise's call that afternoon, but his silence was louder than any storm. She could feel the weight of his restraint, the gathering of something inevitable. "Tell me," Luna whispered finally, her voice barely audible over the distant rumble of thunder. Terry didn't move at first. Then slowly he set the glass down, his knuckles white, where they gripped the marble counter. "They have everything," he said quietly. Luna's head turned sharply. "Everything. Every hospital bill. Every late rent notice. Every credit card statement." He continued, his tone measured, but laced with something darker. "They're not just leaking it. They're twisting it, making it look like you planned this, planned him, planned the children, planned the entire tangled mess their lives had become." Her throat constricted, air catching painfully as her heart thudded against her ribs. "They're saying I trapped you. They're trying to burn us down," Terry corrected softly. "Not just you, us." The following morning it began. Every headline, every news channel, every gossip blog. Luna Parker wasn't a mother anymore. She was a calculated schemer, a manipulator, a woman who used her children as leverage to secure the billionaire's protection. An image of her leaving the pediatric clinic with Ethan and Lily splashed across the screen. Single mother or mastermind, new evidence suggests Luna Parker exploited Terry Peterson's fortune. The phone calls started immediately. The texts, the threats, anonymous numbers, strangers claiming to know the truth. And then came the photo. A single grainy image slid into Terry's encrypted inbox. Luna years ago, standing outside Kingston Memorial Hospital, her face pale, cradling a swollen belly beneath a faded denim jacket. The caption beneath it read, "How many secrets is she still keeping from you?" Luna's hands shook as she stared at it, breath catching between panic and disbelief. "I can't do this," she whispered, pushing the phone away like it burned. "I can't live like this, Terry." He stepped toward her, but she recoiled instinctively, her body curling into itself. "It's not you they want. he said quietly, his voice a low promise wrapped in steel. It's me, and I won't let them win. But Luna's silence told him the truth. She wasn't sure anything was left to save. That night, Terry walked into Peterson Tower and straight into a trap. The boardroom was packed. Attorneys, executives, shareholders, all gathered beneath the sterile glow of recessed lights. At the far end of the table sat Michael Sterling, his former friend turned saboteur, his expression smug beneath a carefully neutral mask. Michael drawled smoothly as Terry entered. Our elusive CEO graces us with his presence. Terry didn't answer. He dropped a thick folder onto the table papers, scattering across its polished surface. Contracts, wire records, proof of Michael's backroom dealings with Vanguard. This ends now, Terry said, his voice calm, controlled. Michael didn't flinch. Instead, he slid a glossy black folder across the table, his lips curving in a cold smile. Not quite, he murmured. Inside were photographs of Luna. Not the grainy shots from gossip blogs, these were private, intimate. Pulled from security cameras, intercepted emails, leaked documents that should never have existed outside their walls. You've lost perspective, Terry, Michael said softly, his voice deliberate, measured. You've let her compromise you. You've put this company, our company, at risk. And what exactly do you want? Terry asked, his voice like ice. I want you gone, Michael said. Step down. Walk away. Give the board control before this scandal drags us all into the fire. Terry leaned forward, bracing his palms on the table, his gaze locked on the man he'd once called a brother. You think you can tear me apart, he said quietly, dangerously. But you've forgotten one thing, Michael. Michael raised a brow, amused. And what's that? Terry's jaw tightened. I have nothing left to lose. Back at the penthouse, Luna sat in the children's room, stroking Noah's soft curls as the baby slept, his chest rising and falling in a slow, steady rhythm. Ethan lay awake on the bunk above, his small hands clutching the edge of his blanket, his eyes glassy with exhaustion. You're crying, he said suddenly, his voice quiet, almost accusing. Luna wiped her cheeks quickly, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Just tired, baby. Ethan hesitated, his throat bobbing like swallowing words he couldn't yet shape. Finally, he whispered, I hate them. The people outside. The cameras. The ones who make you cry. Luna's chest ached with a sharp, crushing tenderness. She climbed onto the bunk, wrapping her arms around him, pressing her forehead to his. I know, she whispered, tears slipping silently into his hair. I know. In the doorway, Terry watched unseen, his hand braced against the frame. Every breath hurt. Every choice felt wrong. But leaving them, that was unthinkable. 2 days later, Elise arrived with news that stripped the last layer of safety from their fragile lives. She said they're filing for custody without preamble, dropping a stack of papers onto the counter. Luna's heart stopped. What Elise clarified grimly about Vanguard's legal team. They're petitioning the court to appoint a guardian for the kids, claiming you're unfit due to your financial instability and media exposure. They're leveraging Michael's testimony, plus the smear campaign against you. Luna gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. They can't just take my children. They can't. Elise agreed, her tone sharp, but they're trying to scare you into disappearing. If you walk away from Terry and cut ties completely, they'll drop the case. Luna's gaze snapped to Terry, her voice trembling with rage. You walked into our lives and painted a target on our backs. He didn't deny it. Couldn't. But when he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, unshaken. Then they'll have to go through me first. That night, while Luna tucked the children into bed, Terry stood on the balcony, overlooking the river phone, pressed tight to his ear. Elise, he said, his voice low. Call every contact we have, every journalist, every attorney, every shadow operator we've ever used. I don't care what it costs. I want Vanguard broken before they lay a hand on my family. Terry, Elise said cautiously. You start this war. You can't control how it ends. I don't want control, he replied softly. I want them scared. When he returned inside, Luna was waiting in the living room, her arms crossed tightly, her expression unreadable. You're planning something, she said. Yes. Her eyes narrowed. Something dangerous. Yes. She took a shaky breath, her voice cracking as she spoke. I can't lose them, Terry. I can't lose my kids because you must prove you're untouchable. He stepped closer slowly and carefully until he stood just inches from her. I'm not proving anything, he said, his voice quiet, steady. I'm protecting what's mine. Her chest rose and fell with unsteady breaths, their gazes locked in the fragile, dangerous space between fear and longing. Finally, Luna whispered, barely audible, What if protecting us destroys you? Then I burn with you, he murmured, his voice breaking on the edges of the promise. At 3 a.m., Terry's phone buzzed violently against the nightstand. Elise's voice crackled through the line, urgent and clipped. They made their move, she said. Michael's leaked something big, something we didn't see coming. Terry sat up sharply, heart hammering in his chest. What Elise hesitated for just a fraction too long. Your sealed records, she said finally. Everything about your father. About the merger. About the money. It's all public now. For a moment the room tilted beneath him. The past he had buried, the secrets he had protected his entire life, were now weapons in his enemy's hands. And for the first time, Terry Peterson felt the walls of his empire tremble. The morning light over Manhattan was muted, swallowed by low-hanging clouds that mirrored the storm inside Terry Peterson's world. The headlines hadn't slowed. If anything, they had sharpened, each cutting deeper than the last. But today wasn't like the others. Today, Terry wasn't playing defense anymore. He stood by the glass wall of the Tribeca penthouse, staring out over the restless city. His reflection in the window looked nothing like the man the world thought they knew, the untouchable billionaire with power stitched into his bones. This man looked stripped raw, sleepless, haunted, dangerous. Behind him, Luna Parker sat cross-legged on the sofa, clutching a mug between trembling hands. The coffee had gone cold long ago, but she hadn't touched it. You're quiet, she said softly, her voice tentative. Terry didn't turn around. I'm calculating. Calculating what? His jaw flexed, his reflection locking eyes with hers through the glass. How to end this, he said. The phone buzzed on the marble counter, breaking the silence. Elise's name flashed across the screen. Terry picked up without hesitation, putting her on speaker. They've called a meeting, she said, her voice clipped. Vanguard. Michael. The board. They want to negotiate at noon. Luna's brows drew together, wary. Negotiate what? Elise hesitated, and that silence was louder than any words. Control, she said finally, of Peterson Holdings, of the narrative, of everything. Terry's expression didn't change, but his grip on the phone tightened. We're the Ritz. Elise answered, and then added quietly, Don't go alone. He hung up without responding. Luna set her mug down carefully, her fingers lingering on the porcelain. Terry, she whispered, what if this is a trap? It is a trap, he said flatly, but it's the last one they'll ever set for me. By noon, the Ritz-Carlton was swarming with security cameras, flashing outside the gilded doors. Terry entered, flanked by 2 guards, Elise at his side. Her expression was unreadable, but her posture was sharp and focused. Inside, the tension was suffocating. Michael Sterling sat at the head of the long mahogany table, Vanguard senior executives lining both sides. A carafe of untouched coffee rested in the center, a poor disguise for the battlefield it symbolized. Peterson. Michael greeted smoothly, leaning back in his chair, fingertips steepled. I wasn't sure you'd have the courage to face us. Terry's expression didn't flicker. He slid a leather folder across the polished surface. Inside, Terry said evenly, you'll find copies of every illegal transaction tying Vanguard to offshore accounts, money laundering, and market manipulation. If these documents go public, you'll be investigated within the hour. Michael smirked, unimpressed. And if you go public, Terry, so do your secrets. About the merger, about your father, about the debts you buried when you took the company public. For a moment, silence hung like a blade between them. Then, Terry leaned forward, his voice low, lethal, each word deliberate. You underestimate me. I don't care what burns anymore as long as I get to choose who goes down with me. The room went still. Michael's smirk faltered just slightly. Back at the penthouse, Luna paced the living room, wringing her hands as though she could twist her fear into something manageable. Ethan sat on the sofa, Lily curled against him, clutching her stuffed rabbit tightly. Mom, Ethan said suddenly, breaking the quiet. Are we leaving? Her steps faltered. Leaving. He nodded, his small face pale, but his gaze steady. Like moving and running away. Luna swallowed hard, sinking to her knees in front of him. Baby, no. This is our home. Ethan hesitated, then whispered, I heard Elise talking to Terry last night. She said we'll have to disappear if they can't beat Vanguard. Her breath caught. Ethan. Before she could respond, the door opened, and Terry stepped inside. His suit jacket hung loose around his shoulders, the top button undone, exhaustion carved deep into his features. Luna rose instantly. What happened? I gave them a choice, he said quietly, and I think Michael just made his. It came 2 hours later. The news broke first. Peterson Holdings stock plummeted 27% in less than an hour. A confidential memo from Michael Sterling surfaced, claiming Terry had misused company funds to finance a lavish lifestyle for Luna and her children. The photos, the bank statements, the evidence, all fabricated but devastatingly effective. Luna's phone lit up with messages she couldn't bring herself to read. Old friends, strangers, reporters, all demanding answers she didn't have. When Terry stormed into his study, slamming the door behind him, Luna followed without hesitation. They're winning, she said quietly, forcing the words past the lump in her throat. He turned sharply, his expression raw. Not yet. Terry. Look at us, she whispered, stepping closer. Look at what this has done to the kids, to me, to you. How much more can we survive? His shoulders sagged under the weight of her words, but his voice was steady when he finally spoke. As much as it takes. That night, Elise returned with one final warning. They're moving for custody tomorrow, she said grimly. Vanguard's attorneys are pushing for an emergency hearing. If the judge buys their narrative, Luna, they could take the kids. Luna's knees nearly gave out beneath her. She gripped the edge of the counterbreath, shallow vision blurring. Terry stepped forward, catching her by the shoulders, grounding her with the steady weight of his hands. They won't touch them, he said softly but firmly. How do you know? She whispered, her voice breaking. Because he said, locking eyes with her, I will make sure the entire world knows the truth before they ever set foot in that courtroom. By dawn, Terry had mobilized everything: his lawyer's private security team and his allies in the press. Elise moved through the penthouse like a general, before battle coordinating calls, pulling files, and making sure every weapon they had was ready to fire. At exactly 10:00 a.m., Terry walked up the New York County Courthouse steps, Luna's hand clasped tightly in his. Dozens of cameras flared, reporters shouting over each other, but he didn't slow. Vanguard's attorneys laid out their case venomously in the courtroom, painting Luna as manipulative and unstable. Every false narrative, every twisted detail, sharpened like a knife. When it was Terry's turn, he didn't hand the floor to his attorney. He stood, one hand braced on the podium, his gaze sweeping the silent courtroom. Luna Parker, he began, his voice deep and unyielding, has been accused of using me, of trapping me, of endangering my children. He paused, letting the silence stretch his jaw tight. Here is the truth, he said, finally, his voice breaking just enough to betray the weight behind the words. I pursued her. I brought myself into her life. I am why she is standing here today, accused of sins that are mine, not hers. For the first time, Luna saw his armor crack. I will not, he said firmly, his voice rising, allow anyone to take from me the only people who have ever mattered. The judge recessed the room, buzzing with murmurs and restless shifting. Elise leaned close, her voice low. You hit them where it hurts, she whispered. But Michael's not done. He'll come harder. Terry's jaw tightened. Then so will I. By evening, news outlets were flooded not with Vanguard stories, but Terry's files. Every shred of evidence of their corruption, every buried deal, every illegal acquisition Elise had uncovered, hit the internet like fire on dry leaves. By midnight, Vanguard stocks were collapsing. Federal investigations were announced. Michael Sterling had vanished into silence. But the cost was staggering. Peterson Holdings, once the crown jewel of Terry's empire, had lost half its market value. Investors fled. Power brokers whispered. And yet, in the quiet corners of the chaos, the battle was finally over. 3 nights later, the penthouse was quiet again. Luna stood barefoot by the window, the skyline stretching endlessly beneath her, a soft breeze curling in from the cracked pane. Terry stepped behind her, sliding an arm around her waist, resting his chin against her shoulder. It's over, he murmured, his voice rough with exhaustion. Is it? She whispered, her gaze fixed on the restless city below. Not completely, he admitted. But we survived. She leaned back into him, her fingers brushing over his. Did we? His arms tightened, anchoring her against the weight of everything they'd lost and still had. Yes, he said finally, his voice quiet but confident. Because you're still here. And so am I. Weeks later, the headlines had shifted. Michael Sterling's arrest dominated the news cycle. Vanguard was in free fall, its executives scrambling to avoid prison. For Luna and Terry, life wasn't perfect. It was quieter, smaller, sometimes fragile in the way only hard-won peace can be. Ethan laughed again. Lily sang in the kitchen while Noah was drawing pictures. And one evening, as Manhattan's lights painted the river gold, Terry took Luna's hand and whispered the words he'd carried for months. I chose you. Not because it was easy, but because every war, every scar, every sleepless night was worth it. Luna didn't answer, but when she leaned into him, her silence said more than words ever could. And somewhere deep inside, Terry knew the battles weren't over, but they were theirs to face together. If this story has carried you through every twist, heartbreak, and victory, if you felt every breath, every choice, every fragile promise, leave a heart or share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to follow Terry and Luna's next chapter, don't forget to follow the channel so you don't miss what comes next.